Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
Ooh, it's our science unit.
Science,
so
yes.
I can probably guess Tom is going to be a little bit more interested than I am. I tend to like those fashion units and I don't know, food units, travel units. You love science, don't you?
Well, I suppose you could argue that fashion and travel is a kind of science in your brain. Why you like travel, why you like fashion.
It's more art.
But it's causing some kind of satisfaction in your brain, which is chemistry, and that's science. So, yeah, I would say that most things are related to science. But in any case, we're talking about a particular aspect of science that is near and dear, well, not necessarily dear, to the hearts of people here in Taiwan. Earthquakes and what they can do to the land.
Wow.
Remember, after that big earthquake down in Tainan, actually it was in Kaohsiung, but Tainan got all the damage. There was a big earthquake down there, and then they were talking about liquefaction. Okay, everybody was concerned about where their houses were because, gee, if a big earthquake happens in our area, is the same thing going to happen to us?
Sure.
Is the land going to get all soft and our building's going to tip over and we're all going to be trapped inside? Yeah, we don't want that to happen to us. But I remember the newspapers had big maps of different areas of Taiwan where soil liquefaction might be a problem.
Well, we know it also had to do with the construction of those buildings that all toppled.
Yep, that was a factor too.
Darn it. But let's learn a little bit more about soil liquefaction. I have to be honest here. This never heard of this term until
I think most people never heard this term until it was a problem. So let's talk about this in our unit on science. Soil liquefaction, cause and prevention. Yes?
You know what? This reminds me of sinkholes. Sinkholes are when the ground just suddenly opens up and it swallows the cars and people and buildings that were standing on top of the ground. Sometimes this happens and it sounds like it's related because that soil becomes less firm and it can't withstand the pressure of something on top of it. Very interesting.
It is very interesting, and you would have to talk to an expert on that to see if indeed they are related. But let's get to it, everybody. This is Unit 5. We're going to talk about soil liquefaction today. Here's our article read from top to bottom. On February 6th, 2016, a magnitude 6.4 earthquake struck Taiwan. While the epicenter of the quake was in Kaohsiung, Tainan saw the worst destruction. Though the magnitude in Tainan was only 5.0, the earthquake damaged hundreds of buildings. Many of these buildings sank into the ground or leaned to one side, which experts believe to be evidence of soil liquefaction. Soil liquefaction is a phenomenon in which an earthquake or other applied stress reduces the strength of the soil so much that it loses its ability to support foundations for buildings. Soil liquefaction most commonly occurs in low-lying areas near bodies of water, such as rivers, lakes, and oceans. The soil in these places is typically loose or saturated, meaning that the space between individual soil particles is filled with water. This water always puts a certain amount of pressure on the soil particles. Normally, the pressure is quite low, and the individual soil particles are able to squeeze out the water around them and clump together to become stiffer, if necessary. However, earthquake shaking greatly increases the water pressure, causing the soil particles to move even farther apart from one another, and thereby preventing them from producing contact forces. In extreme cases, the soil particles lose all contact with one another, and the soil becomes more of a liquid than a solid, hence the name liquefaction. Once the soil is liquefied, it can no longer sustain the weight of buildings, causing them to tilt or subside. This is how soil liquefaction is initiated and undermines the stability of buildings during an earthquake.
Okay, guys, let's get started. We're talking about soil liquefaction, cause and prevention. So it's when the earth or the soil of the earth, the soil is on top of the surface of the earth, it becomes less stable. It isn't able to hold up a lot of weight, which these buildings that are collapsing are pretty heavy. So let's go back in time. On February 6th, 2016, a magnitude 6.4 earthquake struck Taiwan. I remember at the time, I didn't even feel this earthquake. But when I woke up, I had 2 messages from my sister saying, "Are you okay?" She had seen the news. Usually, I'm a very light sleeper, and earthquakes always wake me up.
I didn't feel anything either.
I didn't feel a thing, and I usually do. So I thought, wow, why is she writing to me? I've felt earthquakes before, and we didn't really have much damage. Then I turned on the news and saw. So a magnitude is the size or extent of something, and we often measure earthquakes. We always measure earthquakes, I can say, with numbers. It's called the Richter scale. A scientist whose last name was Richter invented this way to measure the strength of earthquakes. And every time that first number jumps 1 from, for example, 5.0 to 6.0, I think the pressure or the strength of the earthquake is 100 times or something. It's terrible. So going from a 5 to a 6 or a 6 to a 7, it's a huge difference. So it was a 6.4 magnitude earthquake. You can either say magnitude after 6.4 or before. I tend to say it after. It was a 6.4. We often will also say it was 6.4 on the Richter scale. Richter is spelled R-I-C-H-T-E-R. And it's a scale or a way to measure. So that's when it happened, February 6th.
Yeah, right when Chinese New Year was starting there, so that probably ruined a lot of people's Chinese New Year's Eve
sad,
dinner.
Yeah.
I think that kind of put a damper on most people's celebrations because they knew so many people had suffered down south there. But in our lesson today, it does say that this big earthquake struck Taiwan. But the epicenter of the quake was in Kaohsiung. Now, while the epicenter was there, Tainan saw the worst destruction. The epicenter is basically the main point where that earthquake is happening. And this particular epicenter was in Kaohsiung. But for some reason, Tainan saw the worst destruction. That's, of course, when stuff is damaged and broken to such a point that it cannot be repaired.
Yeah, it was horrible. So it saw the worst destruction in Tainan, although it occurred in Kaohsiung, the epicenter at least. It kind of looks like epic center. So be careful with that. It's epicenter.
Yeah, it's not epic enter. It's epicenter. Yeah.
So though the magnitude in Tainan was only 5.0, the further away you get or the farther away you get from the epicenter, as you get away from that, the strength lessens, the number decreases. So in Taipei, it was probably 4 point something, maybe, or 3 point. So we really didn't suffer any physical damage here in Taipei, although it was very sad for all of us. It was hard to be happy during the holiday.
Very true. I'm sure some buildings in Kaohsiung were damaged, but maybe they were overshadowed by that one apartment building that fell down in Tainan. It was all over the news.
It's a complex.
Yeah, complex there, trying to rescue people and stuff like that. But still, many people did die. Now, many of these buildings sank into the ground or leaned to one side, which experts believe to be evidence of soil liquefaction. So they sank into the ground. They just went down. Sometimes ships sink like the Titanic did, or they lean to one side, which means you can't really expect to roll a ball across the floor inside your house there because it will go one direction. So your house is leaning to one side like you would lean against a wall.
Well, there's a very famous building in Italy called the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
There you go.
Yeah, it does lean to the side.
It does indeed. So, yes, this is a sign of soil liquefaction. Now, soil liquefaction is a phenomenon in which an earthquake or other applied stress reduces the strength of the soil so much that it loses its ability to support foundations for buildings. So, yes, soil liquefaction is caused by earthquakes or other applied stress. Applied stress means somebody's doing it on purpose. guess what I'm thinking here is maybe a reservoir or something, a large body of water that's artificial, and it puts extra weight there and causes some things to change in the soil. This will reduce the strength of the soil or the dirt, the top surface of the earth, as you said earlier, and then that soil loses the ability to support foundations for buildings. A foundation is just the lowest part of a building. It's one that takes most of the weight.
Yeah, they put a lot of concrete down before they start building the walls. And that flat level part is called the foundation. We use foundation in a more abstract way too. The foundation of my life is hard work and loyalty to family. You can put foundation on your face, ladies. It's a type of makeup that makes your skin look nice and even. I wanted to say, too, a phenomenon is a word we often use when we're seeing something in the world that we don't really know everything about it yet, but it's something that exists in our world, and maybe the cause or the explanation's a little difficult to understand. So it was a phenomenon, that's for sure, and some of the foundations became loose or they couldn't support the foundations for the buildings. Some of these buildings are quite tall in Taiwan, especially that apartment complex. Those buildings that fell down were quite high, and so there's a lot of weight on the soil or surface of the earth. Right now, guys, we're going to listen to our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be back to talk more about this phenomenon called soil liquefaction.
大家好，欢迎收听 English Digest， 我是 Sunny。今天我们要来看第5单元，这是一个比较严肃的话题，就是土壤液化。就在今年的农历过年之前，大部分的人都开开心心准备迎接9天的连假，但是有一些人就没这么幸运了，因为在南台湾发生了一场大地震，造成了上百人的伤亡，也损坏了数百栋建筑物。有些专家认为台南的灾情会特别严重，主要原因就是土壤液化。这个结论一出来，也连带让许多城市开始公布土壤液化的可能区域，在新闻上闹得沸沸扬扬。我们先来看课文第1段的第2句。这里说到，虽然震央在高雄，但是台南 saw the worst destruction。这边要注意一下哦，这句的意思不是说台南看到最严重的破坏，而是说最严重的破坏发生在台南。我们要知道 see 这个动词有很多意思，其中一个意思是经历、见证。当你看到 see 的主词是时间或是地点，后面则是接一个事件的话，就表示这个事件发生在这个时间点，或是发生在这个地方。例如 2015 saw the warmest average global temperatures on record. 2015年的全球平均温度创下史上新高。接着看到第1段的最后一句，文章说 Many of these buildings sank into the ground or leaned to one side, which experts believe to be evidence of soil liquefaction. 这些建筑物中的许多栋陷入地面或向一边倾斜，专家认为这是土壤液化的证据。这里的关系代名词 which 代替的其实是前面一整个句子，也就是许多建筑物下陷或倒塌这件事情。这个时候 which 是非限定用法，前面要加上逗点，并且是要当成单数来看。例如 Many people use their smartphone while crossing the road, which is a dangerous thing to do. 很多人一边过马路一边滑手机，这是一件很危险的事情。这里的 which 就是指前面边过马路边滑手机这件事情。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Let's continue our lesson about soil liquefaction in our science unit today.
Okay.
And we're talking about the fact that it can happen during an earthquake or when we have other applied stress in a certain area. The soil gets weaker and then buildings collapse. They sink or they lean to one side. The foundations have some problems there. And soil liquefaction most commonly occurs in low-lying areas near bodies of water such as rivers, lakes, and oceans.
Yeah.
So a low-lying area is just a place that is not very high in elevation, just like Kaohsiung and Tainan down there. It's very close to the water. Very close to rivers, lakes, and in Tainan's case, right next to the ocean in that case. And it goes on here to say the soil in these places is typically loose or saturated. Loose just means it's not very tight, it's not very strong. Sometimes during the summer, it's comfortable to wear loose clothes.
Oh, yeah.
So the wind can blow inside there and keep you cool. And saturated means it's just got so much water in there that you can't really put any more of that thing in there.
Yeah, a lot of things can be saturated. When it rains for days and days and days on end, a lot of the dirt that is around the building where I live is just saturated. I try not to step in it because it's just a mess.
It's already full. You can't put any more water in it.
Or if you're an artist and you like to paint with colors, sometimes we'll talk about how an artist has saturated his painting with beautiful, vivid colors. It's saturated color, which means it's filled with color. It's not light, it's dense. So the soil in these places is loose, saturated. It means that the space between the individual soil particles, those are little pieces of dirt particles, is filled with water. This water always puts a certain amount of pressure on the soil particles, which I had never really thought about before, but it makes a lot of sense. Now, normally the pressure is quite low when you're looking at the dirt. Usually, you don't have to worry about this sort of thing, and the individual soil particles are able to squeeze out the water around them and clump together to become stiffer if necessary. So if you see clumps of dirt, we'll often see clumps of dirt in a field or on a farm. My dad has a little tiny garden behind our house, and there are always clumps of dirt after he's used some water to water the plants and then rototill the dirt, which means to turn it over with this piece of machinery, clumps of dirt. So a clump is just a big group of something. You can also have a clump of eyelashes together, ladies. If you're putting mascara on your eyes, they'll sometimes clump together, and to separate them, I just use a little pin or needle.
Yeah, whenever some kind of material just kind of sticks to other parts and makes larger things, that's called clumping. So, yes, the dirt, the soil can clump together and squeeze that water out. And
so how do you squeeze, Tom?
I guess it's because of various pressure in the soil or something.
So you're putting pressure on something if you squeeze it. When I was growing up and I was being naughty sometimes, I was pretty good. My mom would grab my arm and squeeze it. So she was like, be quiet, don't do that. So squeeze. You can squeeze a lot of things. If you mop your floor, you'll use that mop and it'll have water in it, and you'll want to squeeze the water out, so you use the pressure to get that water out of the mop.
Indeed, that's what you do. So, yes, indeed, they can squeeze out the water. The clumps come together. The water leaks somewhere else, and they're stiff as a result. But, or however, earthquake shaking greatly increases the water pressure, causing the soil particles to move even farther apart from one another, and thereby, or therefore, preventing them from producing contact forces. So this is kind of technical here, but the earthquake will increase that water pressure, so the clumping will no longer squeeze the water out, and then as a result, the particles of soil will move even farther apart from one another. In this case, the water is winning thanks to the earthquake, and therefore, the soil soil particles cannot come back together. They cannot have those contact forces, a force or a power that makes them come in contact or that makes them touch each other.
Now, in extreme cases, and this is what we're talking about now, the soil particles will lose all contact with one another. They become separated, and so there's no force with them touching each other. There's a lot more strength if you can stand together, right? Or stick together. But the soil particles lose contact with each other and the soil becomes more of a liquid than a solid. Hence the name, or this is the reason for the name that is pretty new. It's liquefaction. We're using quotation marks around there because it is fairly new. You won't find it in just the regular dictionary. If you look up liquefaction, your dictionary should probably take you to the word liquefy. If you liquefy something, you make something become liquid, or you convert something that's solid into a liquid. Sometimes if you're cooking and you have a blender, you can put tomatoes into that blender and liquefy them and turn those tomatoes into tomato juice.
Which some people enjoy. I like solid tomatoes myself. But in the next paragraph here it says, once the soil is liquefied, or once that happens, when it happens, it can no longer sustain the weight of buildings, causing them to tilt or subside. So basically the soil just gets kind of soft, just like water, and therefore they cannot sustain, or the soil cannot sustain the weight of those buildings. If you sustain something, you maintain pressure against it. It is supported and it cannot be weakened. So in this particular case, it just can't hold the weight of those buildings. It cannot sustain them. It can't hold them up. So therefore, the buildings will sink. They will tilt, which means kind of to lean to the side.
Yeah.
And we have the word subside here, which usually means like something lessens in intensity. The typhoon has finally subsided, for example.
Or my headache has subsided.
There you go. But in this particular case, I think it means that the buildings actually sink.
Yeah, because one of the definitions is to go to a lower level. So that's how they're using it here. This is how soil liquefaction is initiated or started. That's what to initiate means to start, and undermines the stability of buildings during an earthquake. If you undermine something, you make it weaker. I grew up with my mom saying to my dad, "Don't undermine my authority."
Ooh.
We would go to my mom and say, "Hey, Mom, can we go to the party tonight at 10 p.m.?" And my mom would say, "No." And then we go ask our dad, and he goes, "Sure," because he didn't know my mom had said no. So if you undermine something or somebody, you cause their strength to weaken. So here we're saying that it eroded or damaged the foundation beneath something else. So it makes something else collapse. So you undermine the stability or that stable feeling of a building. Buildings are usually quite stable. We hope they are. If you're stable, you won't move, you can't shift, you won't tilt or turn, you remain solid.
Right, so that's how liquefaction is initiated, how it starts.
Yeah.
And that undermines the stability. The stability is no longer there, and the buildings, therefore, can subside, they can sink, or they can lean to one side.
I think Taiwan itself as a country is a prime target for this, is a good place for soil liquefaction because of all the rain we get. We're also an island. We're surrounded by water.
We certainly are. And of course, when this story came out after that earthquake, you can just imagine how real estate values changed overnight. What was once a nice, expensive apartment in one place is now worth nothing. Who wants to live on soil that's going to disappear one day?
Is that a fact?
Oh, I don't know for sure. I'm just exaggerating. But you can certainly...
I haven't seen that the prices have gone down at all.
Well, I remember that in the news they did say that that did affect the real estate market to some degree. But you can talk about that.
It needs to affect it more.
It should indeed, and make houses cheaper for everybody. But hopefully there are some things we can do about this, which we'll talk about in our next lesson. It's not a hopeless situation. There are things that can be done. Here comes our Chinese teacher.
接下来我们就来看看 土壤液化到底是怎么一回事？原来在靠近河流、海洋等水域的低洼地区，这里的土壤微粒之间常常是充满了水的。通常在没有外界压力的情况下，因为水压低，所以土壤微粒很容易就能把水挤出去，让整个土壤变得比较坚硬。我们来看第二段中间的部分，他说这些土壤微粒可以 clump together to become stiffer if necessary， 在必要时粘结成块，以变得更坚硬。这里的 if necessary 原本应该是 if it is necessary， 这里省略掉了中间的 it is。 有时候 if 引导的子句意思很明确，就可以省略掉主词和 be 动词。例如 If possible, I would lie in bed all day today。 如果可以的话，我今天想整天躺在床上。 If possible 就是从 If it is possible 省略而来的。接着文章就说到，如果遇到地震的话，水压会增加，让土壤微粒分离，并且抓不住彼此。在比较严重的情况下，这个土壤与其说是固体，不如说变得像液体，这就是土壤液化这个名称的由来。第二段的最后一句说 The soil becomes more of a liquid than a solid。 句型 more of A than B， 它的意思就是说，与其说是 B， 不如说是 A。 我们举个例子，假设 Trevor 支持的是 NBA 的热火队，但是他没有每一场比赛都看，那这样我们就可以说 He is more of a casual supporter than a dedicated fan。 与其说他是狂热球迷，不如说他是一般的支持者。以上就是今天的课程，谢谢大家收听。
Thanks for joining us, guys. We hope you'll come back soon. For English Digest, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tom.
Bye.
Bye.